We're back. Here we are. The one I've been looking forward to. Might be my most anticipated video ever. Mainly because of, well, what happened, obviously, and then you've got, so many implications, and it's Formula One. It's kind of my bread and butter. So let's just get into it. As I'm sure you've heard, the British Grand Prix was on the weekend. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with, obviously there was a race on, believe it or not. There was a race on. There was an incident and there was a race. So I'll build the whole thing up from the beginning. So obviously, British Grand Prix, first Formula One race this year, full capacity, 140,000 at Silverstone. And it's one of the best races on the calendar, full stop. Obviously being British, you're going to be a bit biased, but the general atmosphere, you've got Britain, Monza, they're very passionate. I think, to be honest, it's if anyone could pick in terms of a whole race event, it's Monza, because the Ferrari fans are so passionate, the Italian fans are so passionate, and Great Britain, because it's just so massive, so historical, and it was where the first Formula One race in 1950 was. So it's kind of like the history's there. So Monza and Silverstone, the two big ones. So this is one of the big ones. Obviously it helps. You've got a lot of British drivers in there. Hamilton, Russell, Norris. I think that's it. I might be missing someone obvious. I think it's just those three. So obviously there's a good British representation in the race. So this was the first one with the sprint qualifying, like we mentioned before. So if you weren't aware, so you had normal qualifying, which set a grid for a little sprint race. Only 17 laps, blast round, full, no pit stops, none of that stuff, no tactics, just as fast as you possibly can. So Hamilton got pole position on the Friday. So it wasn't technically called pole position because it was qualifying for the sprint. So he wasn't awarded a pole position like you normally would. So got pole position, and on Friday, I'm going to keep calling it pole position, just ignore the word, but he qualified fastest on Friday evening. It was a big change because throughout practice one, Verstappen was very, very quick. But you could tell Hamilton was there. Mercedes had obviously, their upgrades that they brought were obviously working. So qualifying went on. You could tell Hamilton was quick. He put in a great lap. Verstappen couldn't match it. The crowd was insane. Like the crowd energy and the crowd reaction to Lewis and the pole position clearly was, but he was very emotional after that, which isn't normally emotional almost ever, certainly around the world. But Britain, obviously, given the support that he gets, despite the polarizing opinion, which I'll come to later on, because there's a lot of assumptions that that it's good to address and good to kind of like get out of the way. So very emotional, and it looked very good. So Hamilton starts the sprint race on Saturday in first position. Now off the line, terrible start. Verstappen flies past him into turn one, off he goes. Hamilton has a little sort of go back at him later on through the lap, but Verstappen was clear and off he goes. And certain racetracks, Verstappen's car was very good in some of the corners, the lower speed, mid-speed corners, because they had better downforce. The Mercedes were a lot quicker in a straight line this time. But it wasn't enough. Verstappen built a good gap. Hamilton was kind of behind. Hamilton did end up closing the gap quite dramatically up to about a second and a half. But Verstappen got the actual pole position. So the sprint race on Saturday was essentially the qualifying. So Verstappen gets pole position. And then the momentum swings all the way back to Red Bull now. Because now Hamilton gets a little nugget of joy. And then Verstappen and Red Bull snatch it back. So they were looking very good for the race itself. Now, the race itself on Sunday. So going into it, we thought, obviously, now that Verstappen all year long, by the way, is kind of getting much better starts than Hamilton. And we all know what happens into turn one. Like he puts his nose in there, gets ahead quite aggressively, gets into turn one. So Verstappen's been off the line much better than Hamilton all year. So given that Verstappen sort of mugged Hamilton at the sprint qualifying, starting on pole now, you'd think, okay, it's going to be a lot easier this time. So off they go. Turn one, Verstappen gets a much better start. Now, Verstappen does run a little bit wide. I think, obviously I can't show the video here, but turn one, Verstappen does go off the track slightly, similar to Bahrain in turn 4, I think it was. at the very first race. He does go off the track slightly, but no one's really brought that. I think I saw one clip on Instagram somewhere where someone was saying he's run wide, but nobody mentioned it. I don't think anyone's either realised it, mainly because of what happened later on, but he does run a little bit wide, and Hamilton, you can see, comes out of the way, lets Verstappen back on the track, but Verstappen gets back on the track that way. And you can tell it's very, very clear. It's almost a carbon copy of the sprint race. The first couple of corners, Lewis is setting him up for an overtake. So happens again. In the race, off they go. Turn 3, they come round to the long straight. Now, Verstappen's in front. He weaves out. Hamilton comes alongside him. And Hamilton is that far in front. He's a long way in front. And then because it's quite a quick left-hander now, and Hamilton's to the outside, he doesn't quite make the corner, but there's enough space for Verstappen to go through. Verstappen goes through, and Hamilton then sets him up for the long run into what's called Copse Corner, which is the flashpoint. So we get to flashpoint now. Hamilton races up to, now if we're talking like that, so this is Verstappen, Hamilton gets to about there. Now this corner is the fastest corner on the racetrack, one of the fastest corners in the whole F1 calendar. It's about 180 miles an hour. It's normally flat out. If obviously by yourself, you go flat out up to 180 miles an hour into a very, very quick section of corners. So it's not normally an overtaking track, but there is a lot of run out room to the left. So they get to this corner now. Now a bit of context to wind it back. Bahrain, when Verstappen was chasing Hamilton down, he went round the outside. They very fair racing. He goes round the outside and passes Hamilton off the track. He had to give the place back. Imola, in the rain, Hamilton was on pole. Verstappen comes alongside him. Hamilton then is about half a car length, probably about that much in front, and it's a chicane. So it's a quick left-right section. It's in the rain. Verstappen was strong there. I wouldn't say aggressive. I say it was strong. He didn't leave Hamilton room, but there wasn't any kind of issue. Verstappen did have the corner, but it was a very strong move. He didn't really leave Hamilton a lot of space there. Hamilton goes over the bumps, gets damaged. Verstappen goes and wins that race quite comfortably. Turns out that because of the safety cars, Hamilton gets away with it because they get to fix his car and whatnot, and he ends up coming second in that race. So that was okay. Spain, you might hear about. Spain's the one that is kind of the reason why this argument now is as it is because Spain was the race where the first time there was something like a flashpoint between these two. They've been very respectful throughout. One's overtaken the other. It's been hard but fair. Like no, there wasn't really any clashes apart from the ones I mentioned in Imola and Bahrain. So in Spain, off the line, Max got a good start. Hamilton got a very good start. Hamilton was he had the corner. He was on the outside this time, and it was a right-left section in Spain, the very, very first corner. Verstappen really sent it into the corner. He didn't really make the apex. He sent it into the middle of the corner. Hamilton literally swerves out the way, like quite literally swerves out the way, even though Hamilton had the corner, because in that particular corner, you want to be hugging on the inside and then run round. Hamilton literally had to swing very aggressively out to the left to avoid Verstappen, who on the onboard camera, you see Hamilton coming through, and Verstappen literally, the car flashes in front, and then Hamilton has to come out of it. That was the very first time I think everyone thought that was a very hard move. And Christian Horner, I'll see if I can find the quote, I'll put it up here. Christian Horner, the Red Bull team boss, was very happy about it and said this is what Max is like, which is fine. Nobody got damage. Hamilton, that particular race, Hamilton managed to win, overtaking Max into that same corner through good strategy. So the guys come together. So yeah, fast forwarding now. So given that what we know about Max going forward, and previous to this season, certainly in his early days, I mean, he is only 23 years old. So when he was younger, he had a very bad reputation of being dangerous and quite aggressive and quite, not cynical, but just very, very reckless and very dangerous. So he's kind of curbed that sort of mentality. Hamilton's never had that reputation. He's never had that reputation ever. He's never been a dirty driver. Martin Brundle and Damon Hill both referenced that. They said, look, that's why Martin Brundle has him as the greatest of all time over Schumacher, because Schumacher has had 2 instances in title deciders, which many people might not know. 1994, he was leading with Damon Hill, and then he deliberately crashed into him. They ruled that as a racing incident, and then Schumacher won the title because they both crashed off. 1997, 3 years later, against Jacques Villeneuve, he took him out again. This time they disqualified Schumacher from the whole championship, so he didn't even come second. So they disqualified him from the whole championship. They gave it to Villeneuve. So when you're reading a lot of stuff and you see a lot of news articles and memes or whatever comments, it's important to realise who the drivers are and what their histories are, because that does make a lot of difference. Now, as they come together, Hamilton's obviously this year been giving Max a lot of room. Max has been very strong, and rightly so. Obviously, when you're a racing driver, you can't just be like, yeah, here you go, mate, take that corner. You need to be strong, but you need to obviously play the long game, which Hamilton has been doing. Max has been getting the benefit of it, and that's why he was 33 points in front, because he's made some moves that Hamilton wasn't willing to risk a crash for. So they come to the corner. It's a very quick corner. They were probably, yeah, like I said, Hamilton's probably here, Verstappen's about here. They both come together. So Hamilton clips, so in terms of the contact, Hamilton clips Verstappen's rear right tyre, sends him off into the gravel, hits the tyre barrier at 51G, which I saw a graphic, I think it's the 3rd biggest impact in Formula One. So Romain Grosjean, the fireball from last year, that was, I think it was 67G, it was in the 60s, and obviously there was fire involved in that. They all walked away okay. So Max got out of the car, eventually he was okay, in brackets, obviously very winded. Now, typically, there's a few different ways you can come at this. So in terms of the corner, my personal opinion on the corner, it hasn't changed from when I saw it initially through all the things I've watched over the last 48 hours. It's a corner where you need, especially when you're championship rivals, you need to know what the stakes are. Now, Lewis had a right to go for the corner. Max also had a right to defend the corner. Max there was a split chance. I mean, there is a good point. There's 180 miles an hour. You've got a tenth of a second or a split second to make a decision whether you want to shut the corner and hope the guy backs off, which is what Max did. So Max got to the corner and shut the door essentially, and then is essentially hoping, he doesn't know, this is one thing, he doesn't know for sure Hamilton's not on his back tyre. He knows he's there, but if he takes the corner, and he didn't make any, when he takes the corner, he didn't make any allowances, so he wasn't wide on the corner. He took the corner at the right apex, as the line you should, and essentially hoped that Hamilton would back out of it. Now, if you keep doing that, I guess if Hamilton says, okay, I don't want damage, he will win, continue to win races, and Hamilton will continue to come second because Max is willing to risk more. So at some point, no matter who you are, whether you're Norris or Ricciardo or Giovinazzi, at some point you need to say, well, no, you need to put your nose in there. I said, well, if I put my nose in there now, it's going to potentially stop you from shutting the door on me every single time, and stop me losing every single race. So it wasn't a smart move from Hamilton, for sure. Hear the headlines. Wasn't smart from Hamilton, and he did miss the apex. He wasn't where he should have been. He missed the apex slightly, again, 108 miles an hour, first lap, all that kind of stuff. Hamilton missed the apex, and that's why there was contact from his side. Verstappen was ahead in terms of the front wing, but not he didn't have the right of way, in the sense that you're far enough ahead that there's nobody should come up the inside of you. It was sort of a 50-50 in terms of how you go into the corner. And someone's got to lift, basically. You can't both go through the corner at the same speed, because what happened. So someone's got to lift in that situation. And neither of them did. This time, neither of them did. Verstappen did what he always did, or what he always does, and he's going to go 100% full beans for the corner. Hamilton didn't do what he's been doing this year, and he said, no, I'm actually going to try and take this corner, given what happened in the last race, given what happened in Spain, Bahrain, Imola. And there was contact, off he goes into the wall. Now, my initial reaction, obviously, when you see all the things, all the positions level out, you see Hamilton's second still running, and a safety car comes out. Lap one, two things. Lap one, normally, you don't get penalties for, because lap one, everyone's together, full of fuel, getting all heated up. normally, and this is seen all over this, all up and down the grid in terms of you don't need to be at the top. If there's an incident on lap 1, it's I would say 9 times out of 10 they don't give, even unless it's stupid, unless it really is stupid. But if there's contact, someone locks their brakes, goes into someone, takes someone out, there normally isn't a penalty for it. Now, typically, so like we saw a couple weeks ago in Austria, where there being penalties handed out left, right, and centre, that was mid-race, wheel-to-wheel racing, someone not leaving enough room when there's enough time and peace of mind to get out of the corner. It wasn't 180 miles an hour. These were very slow corners. Perez leaving Leclerc out to dry, and then vice versa. And then, before I mentioned about Hamilton and Albon twice, slow corners, you got a lot more decision making. They are penalty corners. So if you take someone off, normally it's a 5-second penalty. That's typically how it works. You normally get a 5-second penalty because you've put someone else 10 places down the order or to the back of the grid, but they're still running. So normally you get a 5-second penalty because that's normally sufficient to change some positions or to give you the sort of penalty that they've maybe incurred. So 5 seconds, you've probably, in terms of overall race time, if you go off into the gravel and then you get back on the track, it's normally 5, 6, 7 seconds. And that's enough penalty to level out. 10 seconds is, generally speaking, it's a strong penalty. It's a strong penalty in the sense of a racing incident. So normally you've got 5-second penalty or a 10-second penalty. And then the one after that is a drive-through penalty. So you go through the pit lane, which is obviously limited to 50 miles an hour. So you're losing a lot of time there. A full pit stop, normally 20, 25 seconds. So it's up to a 30-second penalty, a drive-through. And they're extreme. That's dangerous driving if you've really been irresponsible and really done something obvious. And then, of course, you've got a stop and go penalty, which is essentially a pit stop, but you're not allowed to do any tyres, which is the worst one because you have to come in, stop for 10 seconds. Bear in mind, a pit stop's 2.5 seconds. So you're having a super, super slow pit stop, but you can't even change your tyres. So that's your whole race ruined. And they are you have to really kamikaze someone and take them out completely to get one of those. So in terms of the penalties available, at the time, before it was given, I would have said 5-second. I think I said at the time, 5-second would have been, if you're feeling brave, you'll give a 5. I just couldn't see anything more than that. Now, given that Max was out of the race, went to hospital for precautionary checks, I don't know if depends on how people see it. He wasn't sent to the hospital from an injury, he was sent to the hospital for precautions, they checked him out, he was discharged. That's kind of standard for a 50G crash. And he was obviously very shaken up. Now, and also another thing to note with penalties, the consequence isn't taken into account when you hand the penalties out. So because Max went off to hospital, that's got nothing to do with how many seconds you give the penalty. The penalty is based on the crime. So given the crime of a move from Hamilton took a driver off the track and out of the race, that probably, all in all, a penalty was probably fair. And 10 seconds, at the time, 10 seconds was very harsh, I thought. I think it's been replicated. I think Karun Chandok, one of the F1 analysts, thought it was harsh. Nobody, and I've written them down, Karun Chandok, Jenson Button, former world champion, Damon Hill, former world champion, Martin Brundle, the co-commentator, Otmar Safnauer, who's the Aston Martin team boss, and Johnny Herbert. None of them, only Jenson Button hinted that there might be a penalty coming. So the general consensus at the time was racing incident. And this is across all these very, very experienced Formula 1 drivers, and they watch Formula 1. Obviously, if you look on the internet, comments, it's not going to be the same thing. So that's why it's important to watch some legit people, understand who's talking and who's saying what. At the time, 10 seconds was one of those, it's like, okay, I can see why you give it because another driver's come off, but it was definitely strong. It wasn't a lenient penalty. It definitely wasn't. He got away with murder because 10 seconds is a lot to give, especially given that other things happen in other races and they don't get 10-second penalties. So with all that in mind, it was a red flag. So race was nullified. Everyone goes to the pit lane. They can do the changes because Hamilton got damage, and Mercedes came out and said afterwards that if there wasn't a red flag, Hamilton would have had to retire. So that's the second time there's been an accident. Well, this one involved him, but the second time there's been an accident in a race, Hamilton's got damage, and he's been saved by a red flag, which is quite extraordinary luck, to be fair. But the 2 times that Hamilton's been in trouble, they've been really freak accidents. I mean, the one in the rain in Imola, he was overtaking George Russell, who was being lapped, and George Russell didn't give him the dry line, and Hamilton went off into the barrier. So that was very extraordinary. That doesn't normally happen. And obviously this time, a crash between the 2 best drivers in the grid was quite extraordinary. Now, going forward, given well, after the incident itself, Leclerc managed to get in front of Hamilton. So Leclerc's leading the race now. Hamilton second. I think you had Bottas and then Norris. So at this point, you're thinking Hamilton should just cruise up to the back of Leclerc and go past him. But it wasn't the case, because Leclerc had a quick car. So Leclerc got out in front after the restart, which was off the line. You could tell the difference between the race starts was very, very marked. So this time Hamilton was a lot more passive, just willing to stay up behind Leclerc. Off they go, smashing through the race, got to about lap 27, 28. And obviously with Hamilton's 10-second penalty, it was looking like he was going to come somewhere to maybe podium, 3rd, 4th, 5th, something in that kind of range. So everyone pits, and they come out of the pit stops, and Hamilton's 13 seconds behind with about 20 laps to go. So given the pace advantage, well, the pace advantage for Mercedes, but given the pace of the Ferrari, it wasn't looking like a done deal. Whereas all these other times when you've got a pit stop for fresh tyres, it looks like Hamilton's going to chase you down and definitely get you. This time it didn't look like that at all. It looked like Hamilton would just come second. But Hamilton was absolutely roasting, flying through the through the field, I guess. He overtook Norris very, very quickly. Bottas got out of his way, and they chased down Leclerc, who had some engine issues, intermittent ones. So his engine was kind of sputtering at times. It wasn't broken, but it was kind of very hit and miss. It ends up getting Leclerc on the second last lap at the same corner that he crashed with Verstappen in, and the move was almost the same. So they came up to the same Copse corner. Hamilton went down the inside again. I mean, given it's lap 51, you've already crashed there. That kind of tells me that it wasn't a out of the ordinary move on Verstappen, because he did that move 3 times on Norris, on Leclerc, and on Verstappen initially. So he comes down the inside of Leclerc. They both make the corner. This time Hamilton's on the apex, and Leclerc is a little bit wider, and he ends up kind of backing out a little bit, running wide. Off Hamilton goes, wins the race. Post-race celebrations were wild, and the crowd were going mad. Now I think there was, I'll get into some assumptions in a minute, but the crowd were very, very much, it's like a football stadium. It was literally like the crowd were going crazy. National anthem was very big. The post-race interviews were good as well, and Leclerc was obviously devastated. Well, not devastated. He was upset that he didn't win the race. Not upset, but he was, he probably thought he could have won that race. He led every lap, Leclerc, in the end, obviously, because he ended up leading that first lap that Verstappen and Hamilton crashed. So, given that it was a race that Leclerc could have won if he had an extra 1 or 2 laps less, it was an amazing performance from him. Hamilton came through with a 10-second penalty and still won the race by, I think it was about 4 seconds in the end. Now that's why, retrospectively, some people are very upset with the penalty that Hamilton got. They thought he probably could have been more. You just can't give a drive-through penalty for that. It would have had to have been. They'd have had to look at all the onboard cameras and decide that Hamilton did that on purpose, which obviously, I mean, anyone who's sane knows that Hamilton wouldn't have tried to do that, given that he's behind. He was 33 points behind in the championship. You try to take your rival out, you could both end up going out, or you'll end up going out, and the title race would have been over. If Hamilton had crashed and Verstappen won the race the way Hamilton did, the title race would be absolutely put a fork in it. Don't worry about it. We'll come back next year. So any kind of idea that Hamilton did it on purpose would be just silly. And now, as far as the championship is concerned, I would say it's game on is an understatement. We're back now to 2016 with Hamilton-Rosberg, because this is now, so first of all, the gap is 8 points between the two. So before it was 33, which it would have taken, Hamilton would have had to win a lot. 4, 5 or even 6 races, assuming there's no big DNFs, Hamilton would have had to win so many races to claw back 33 points on a Verstappen car, which is at the minute superior. So given that there was a whole 25-point swing today, or yesterday, is insane. Now both, so obviously the Constructors' Championship is now down to 4 points between the two teams. It's, game on, but now there's like an edge to it. Because before it was all, Hamilton v Verstappen, young v old, new v old, and it was respectful and close, and Max was winning, and everyone was happy, enjoying it. And now it's war. To be fair, it is, depending on how the only wild asterisk that it's not guaranteed war. The only reason why I'd asterisk that is because we've got a week off. So this weekend there's no Formula One. So Max is at home, Lewis is at home, all the social media stuff, which I'll get into in a minute, has happened. There's going to be a cool down period of a week. Luckily for these two and for the championship, there's a week off to kind of cool off, and then there's Hungary, and then there's a summer break, so 3 weeks of no Formula One. So 4 of the next 5 weeks, there's no Formula One. So that's key in terms of diffusing this, so that it won't end up in a massive crash the next race. It may still end up in a crash at the next race, because Verstappen is fuming. I put his tweet, what he said, which is rare for a Formula One driver to come out and be that scathing, but Max is that way inclined. Hamilton had some strong comments post-race saying Max was very aggressive, which has been true. And I think this is probably one of those times I think Hamilton was probably thinking, there's something needs to be done here. You can't keep shutting the door on me and being that aggressive, which is fair. But I do think, in terms of blame, the overall thing, in terms of blame, it was Hamilton's fault they crashed. It was Hamilton's fault they crashed. If Hamilton backed out of it, they wouldn't have done it. And then, of course, you need to play devil's advocate and say, did Max do everything he could have? Which it's been established he could have done more to avoid that crash. And I think the assumptions, it's almost like you get what you deserve in terms of when you build up to a race with this many close calls and you race that hard, it's going to come to a head at some point. And I think it was mentioned a long time ago, I think it was after Spain, after that very, very tough move, Mark Brundle said these two are going to come together, because Verstappen isn't going to keep sending it and Hamilton's not going to keep backing out, because otherwise we're going to get Verstappen's just going to walk to a championship because Hamilton's backing out of contact every single time. So that's sort of my overall very extended opinion on the incident. Again, it was a racing incident because A, it's turn 1, B, both of them could have done more. Yes, Hamilton was at fault for the crash, he caused the crash. The 10-second penalty was certainly enough. I thought it was very strong at the time, and he managed to still win the race despite that. That's because his car was very good and he's very good. He's won the British Grand Prix 8 times now, which is, the next closest is 5. So he's won this one. This is his track. So this is one of those tracks that he's very, very good at. And the fact he qualified on pole, he qualified on Friday, number 1 in the sprint in the qualifying, does prove that. And this will give him a big boost. Now, segue, one thing that won't give him a big boost is all the racial abuse that came up, which is, again, it's not surprising, of course, given the England team the other week and what's been going on forever, but certainly it's been highlighted more, which is important. Now that everyone's come out very strongly against it, which is good. I don't know what they're going to do. It's hard to know what Instagram and Facebook, etc., are going to do about it. It's to be expected, and what's good in these situations, the thing I always look to is the response of people, and the response to it from everyone has been strong. It's been, denouncing it, this sort of behaviour, and I think, without going into it too much, the response has been good, and the response has been where it needs to be. And now, as we've known for a very long time, social media companies need to make a big step and to try and reduce, if not get rid of this thing on their platforms, because it is literally just, when it comes out on these platforms, they have the power to kind of oversee it and make some changes. So the racial abuse Hamilton suffered has, whether you like it or not, somewhat changed the dynamic of this thing, because now Verstappen was in the wall. He come out of hospital. He's out. Hamilton's getting racially abused. You can't really compare the two because they're not really comparable. But in terms of who's been slighted, they've now both been wronged not by each other, but they've now both at a deficit. So Hamilton hasn't got out of this scot-free. He's won the race and he's back in the championship, but now he's getting racially abused by Formula One fans. So we will see what happens in this next week. I would expect, obviously Hamilton being 36, I think it is, older, very experienced. He's been here before with Nico Rosberg. He's been here many times with other drivers. I think the next week will be, it'd be interesting to see what the PR teams and what they decide to do. Max is going to be fuming, for sure. Like, no matter what happens, he's going to be fuming. Lewis is going to have to now think how he can approach. They're both going to have to think how they're going to approach this next race in Hungary. Because we've got a week off, then a race, and then a summer break, and then it's back into the title. So, which is probably means this thing that has come at a good time, I think. It's definitely come at a good time. It's definitely one of those times where you want another race because you need to see this getting sorted out soon. You don't want people to sit on this bad feeling for too long, but you don't want a race too quick, and you don't want too many races, I think. I think the perfect post-race solution is have a week off, everyone cool off, have another race, and then summer break to reset. By which point both title races could be bang even, because 8 points is the gap between a winner with the fastest lap and second place. So if Hamilton wins the next race with the fastest lap, they'll be tied going into the summer break, which from a championship point of view is what everyone wanted. It's what everybody said they wanted. They wanted close racing, and you're going to get it now. And depending on how these two guys and how their teams and how their PR guys and all this kind of thing handle it, it could go nuclear, or it could get completely watered down in the next 2 weeks. But we will see. So I think I've covered, because I wrote down loads of just talking points / assumptions that out off the back, and I think I've covered all of them. I've covered, the fact whose corner it was. I've covered Lewis, whether he was a dirty driver or not. I think that's been established. It wasn't. He didn't do it on purpose. Red Bull, one thing that did come out of it was obviously Red Bull were on the radio to the race director. He doesn't hand out the penalties. He's kind of oversees everything. They're on the radio to race director complaining, saying Hamilton definitely should be punished. And obviously then Toto Wolff, the Mercedes top guy, was coming back to the radio. It was a bit like football. They used a good analogy on the actual broadcast. It was like football when they crowd the referee and ask for yellow cards. That's exactly what it's become. And Formula One this year have added a new feature where they play the team radio to the FIA. So essentially the manager's telephone to the referee, which has never happened before, but now it is. And now you're seeing a lot of the sort of behind the scenes sort of cat and mouse stuff, which was evident on the Netflix documentary. So I think we saw a lot more of that behind the scenes stuff because we never saw that. And now we see the behind the scenes stuff. We realise it's as dramatic as that. It's as political as any sport. So that's a new move. Max's aggression we've covered. The move compared to Leclerc we've covered. So given that Hamilton went for the same move on the two different people, he missed the corner slightly for Verstappen, and Verstappen gave him no room when you're actually in the corner. And he went from the same move, made the corner. Leclerc gave him room. There was no contact. Leclerc ended up going wide. So that's what Verstappen should have done, knowing that he had the lead. Hamilton, I think, if roles were reversed, I think Hamilton would have done what Leclerc ended up doing at the end of the race. Verstappen would have sent it. Hamilton would have gone out off to the gravel and then followed. That's what I think would have happened. That's my opinion of it. Yeah, the fan perception. Yeah, the fan perception is key. And I think it depends on how much social media you watch, you view. No matter what, if you look at all the comments, every single post, you'll see Max is robbed, Lewis is cheat, Lewis is blah blah blah. It's like anything. Like if you see enough of it, you'll start to believe it. And I think having watched the broadcast, having watched 2 different podcasts today, there's some good balanced views about what happened, and everyone is sort of the same opinion. Not that it's my particular opinion, but it happens to be everyone in the same. Everyone who's got some sense has got the same sort of opinion. There's obviously the inflammatory ones either way. Nobody's saying it's Max's fault, really, in terms of he's not to blame, but his aggression had some impact on it. It was, I think, the general consensus is a racing incident that Hamilton was more at fault for. The penalty was justified, and it was still a world-class drive to come back. One thing I will say is that we were robbed of an all-time great. I think it could have been an all-time great race if one of them, if Verstappen had run a bit wide and Hamilton was in the lead, or if Hamilton was chasing, we could have had an all-time great race. Given the speed that Hamilton was showing, it could have been an absolutely insane race that only kind of builds towards in 2 weeks' time in Hungary, which is going to be a good race. Hungary, I'll have to watch some of the races back, because we had one last year. I think that was the one where they Hamilton and Mercedes pitted early, late towards the end of the race, and chased Verstappen down and made a good move there. So it's an interesting racetrack. Red Bull have been good there. You wouldn't expect. I mean, Hamilton does like Hungary, so we'll see. I think the key is we could be in for something. I at this point I do not know. If it was two young drivers, I think the next race there'll be contact in turn one. They'll both go off, or like back in the day with Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton in Spain, it was building, and then turn 4, it was actually how the Rosberg squeezed Hamilton to the grass. Hamilton spun, hit Rosberg, and they both go out. So do I think there's going to be contact? I'll be fascinated to see whether I think now Hamilton's back in the game in terms of the title race. I don't think he's going to send one again, whereas I think Verstappen is likely to send one. So I think at this point, if you're Verstappen, if you're sensible, you should play it sensible from here and not try and risk it. Because if you risk it, you may well end up coming off worse, because Hamilton's got the sense and experience to get out of confrontations at this point in his career. So I think if anyone's more likely at this point, it's going to be Max, obviously, because he was wronged. And if given that what Hamilton's been like throughout the year, and given that he's now taken 25 points out of the lead, and both championships are back on, and there's now a break, I can't see Hamilton being risky. But if there's a gap, I mean, get your popcorn ready, because next it's going to be absolute fireworks. So hope I've made some sense of it. It's a lot to get through. Hopefully, if you watch a lot of the clips and see what everyone else is saying. But I think I really wanted to jump on it and get a big breakdown, because if I added this to the chat, it'd have been over an hour long and you'd have had to wait for it. So hopefully you enjoy it. Let me know, give me some feedback, what you think, if you saw anything different, if you think I'm right or wrong. And I will see you next week.